Welcome. And today I'm so happy to know that we have Dr. Katherine Mathews from the University of Iowa with us to talk about the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act. Once again, the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act is 20 years old. On December 18th, George W. Bush signed it into law. And Kathy and I were just discussing how early in the 90s there was nothing to do. And there was a moment in time when she became the neuromuscular expert by default at the University of Iowa. Then if we fast forward to 2001, when the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act was signed into law, which was landmark legislation, and it had three components. One was standards of care. The second piece of that, or another piece of that, was the Wellstone Centers, research centers. And the third piece of that was a research plan. So you were in the beginning a part of the MDSTARNET. Can you tell us what it was and what it was supposed to do?
So the concept from my perspective, and the CDC may have a different idea, but the concept from my perspective was to understand care of boys across the country in the real world, and identify ways that we could improve. The goal, I think, was to identify things that were associated with good outcomes and things that were associated with less good outcomes, to obviously try to improve care across the board for all boys with Duchenne. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the MDSTARNET, it's not very well known. There certainly are many publications coming across it, but few people know about it. And that led to the development of the standards of care, or the care considerations, in 2010 and 18. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So one of the CDC initiatives, or together with PPMD and other advocacy groups, primarily PPMD, was to try to use all the available data to develop a standard of care so that we were able to provide the best possible care across sites and across clinics in the US.
Then, as the Wellstone Centers were, after the bill was passed, it was a couple of years by the time they had submissions for Wellstone Centers and then review and obviously identification. Iowa was one of the first Wellstones that was ever existed. And you worked with Kevin Campbell. Can you talk to us a little bit about that Wellstone Center?
So the Wellstone Centers, I think, are a fabulous structure for advancing knowledge about muscular dystrophies, and Duchenne obviously being one of the major ones being studied. The structure of the Wellstone Centers is that they have to have a basic scientist, they have to have a clinician, and then they have to have some sort of a core that gives back to the community. So that's like it's like, this is what we want, the kind of structure we want in order to advance science. You want the doctors to be able to talk to the basic scientists. You want to have the doctors doing research to better understand clinical aspects of the diseases. So I think the Wellstones have just been fabulous, and they've also, I think, helped keep people. One of the big challenges in medicine is keeping researchers in the field. And the Wellstone Centers, with their training programs and the expanse of research that's being done, I think have really helped to keep people in the field and have spurred enthusiasm in addition to advancing knowledge.
Yeah, I think the Wellstones, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, for so long, at least in my experience, from when my boys were diagnosed with Duchenne, up through the 90s, and when 2001, when this was signed into law, it seemed like the Wellstone Centers, the CDC investment in surveillance and standards of care were sort of this tipping point. Because when I look back 30 years, and for a while it was just nothing. And then it seemed like this Muscular Dystrophy Care Act was a catalyst to sort of get us to a tipping point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the degree to which there's definitely been a change, and it makes sense that the MD Care Act is one of those things that helped tip that forward, because it made doing neuromuscular or muscular dystrophy research attractive, and that's huge.
Yeah, and the investment was amazing. And I can't say enough of thanks for you, Kathy. So many people, whenever we talk about we talk about a question, whenever we talk about care, whenever we talk about research, your name is like first. So Kathy Mathews is. Let's go to Kathy Mathews. So we are. I am really grateful to starting cardiac meds, especially early on. This was a question I asked when my boys were here: is the heart impacted? And back then, when there was nothing, it was no, the heart isn't impacted. And I think they died of heart failure. So they clearly the heart is impacted. And I think that has contributed significantly to our understanding of the dilated cardiomyopathy here, or what the cardiologists are now trying to determine as fibrofatty replacement, and treating them early and often with steroids, early with cardiac meds, early with really giving them the hope to make dramatic changes. Do you also see newborn screening in place? Do you think that that's a possibility as well? And then treating these children right as diagnosis occurs?
Yeah, I think that's certainly an exciting thing, and as in other diseases has made a huge difference. I think we're going to have a lot of questions about how, like we started out this discussion, what do you do with the child diagnosed before age 1? What is the best treatment? And so I think it's an exciting time, because we could make a dramatic difference.
One last question for you. As we know, these young men are growing into adults. How do you think about independence for them? How do you prevent the parents from developing a bubble around the whole family so that no one gets outside of that bubble? And how do you encourage independence?
That's a huge question. And I think there's a societal problem. I think our society does not have ideal resources in place to help competent people with motor disability to live independent lives. So I think that there is a societal problem. At the individual level, we do everything we can to start talking early on about, well, what are you going to be when you grow up, and going to school, and how are we going to make this happen? And so I think trying to just place the concept early on that, yeah, you're talking to your other 16-year-olds about where they're going to go to college. Let's at least think about this. And but what I see, like I said, are the societal things. There are certain physical assistance needs that are hard to meet for many, many families. And I mean, my dream is that every community would have houses where there are caretakers and multiple individuals living in them independently, but with the physical assistance as needed. I sort of had this, I think Denmark has something like that. I think we're behind in this country, and I think that's part of what we need to get to easier place. But on the other hand, I'm writing driver's license approval forms for boys and men with Duchenne, which I was not doing 20 years ago, I can guarantee it. And we're seeing them, getting advanced degrees and working full time. And so it's, for those who are able, it's very gratifying to see.
For sure. And I always say to myself, if one can do it, then many can do it. So as I see these first men starting to drive and get full-time jobs, I'm thinking that there will be a groundswell of opportunity for many. I guess we can never say all, but many, to have those independent opportunities to drive and to socialize without their parents involved, and to find go to college, find jobs, whatever. I guess in my dreams, and this is back to advocacy, I always hoped that we somehow could create or develop housing that would be independent housing next to a medical school or a college with all of these different healthcare professions, so that you could rotate through as a care experience for these young people, getting all the young people together, and the young men could then have that experience of caregiving, care, and others caretaking, and that way we would have some societal change in terms of understanding disability, removing the stigma of a wheelchair or other equipment that people need in order to properly function and have a good quality of life. So that'll be our next advocacy. Maybe one day there'll be a piece of legislation that we can all get behind, and we'll see the next groundswell. I can't thank you enough for taking time to interview with us. Please take care of yourself, and thank you for taking care of all the people we care so deeply about. It's just a pleasure to know you're in our space.
I have to thank you for all your advocacy work. We wouldn't have MDSTARNET and we wouldn't have the Wellstone Centers without your tireless efforts, Pat. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. This Duchenne community is a pretty strong, good community. So I think that at the end of the day, whatever I've done is small compared to what I've gotten in return from having a family that gets it, from having physicians who are willing to talk to us like this instead of only in the patient environment. So the fact that this community has come together and really thought about being a family and answering questions relevant to the family makes all the difference to me. So thank you so much for taking time with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.